Okay, so now that we've talked about different kinds of identities that we might identify with based on all sorts of different factors that we've been discussing, let's talk more about the way that we use ethnic identity in anthropology. So, ethnic identities are incredibly powerful. One of the most powerful identities that human beings are capable of developing. They are often not just one thing, they are some sort of a connection to a group of people who they believe share lots of different things. So, ethnic identity combines other kinds of identities, such as shared culture, shared history, shared language, sometimes shared genetic ancestry in the case of South Korea, which I'm going to talk about. And yeah, they've also ethnic identities have been used for very good reasons and also for some very negative outcomes, such as the KKK, such as genocide, such as all sorts of different things. So ethnic identities are powerful, and they're able to motivate human beings to do things that they might not otherwise be motivated to do. So here at the top, this is one of the first Google images that comes up if you Google ethnic identity, and you see the different people wearing their sort of national flag outfits that sort of correspond to some things about them. Some of them are a little bit not great. The African fellow with the monkey behind him is not a great look. But this is one of the first images that comes up when you do a Google search. Yeah, and unfortunately, this is all very, very surface culture, but these do correspond to some ethnic identities. So this bottom image is actually a sort of South Korean nationalist party having a rally in South Korea. But what's interesting about South Korea is their ethnic identity also extends to North Korea. So it's important to think about and realize that ethnic identities don't necessarily confine themselves to national borders. Sometimes they are transnational. So both North and South Koreans, even though they're two separate countries, think about themselves as one ethnic identity. Whereas in the United States, we have one nation, one country with multiple different ethnic identities within it. And that's something that we tend to pride ourselves on as being this sort of large melting pot with lots of different ethnic identities within us. Now, I want to move on, if I can get this, there we go, to talking about origin myths. So, origin myths are one of the ways that ethnic identities are built and created and oftentimes wielded in a very powerful way, as we were talking about earlier. So we're familiar with our own origin and the origin myths of our own country to some extent, but I thought we would, because I'm familiar with North and South Korea, I would talk more about Korea. So, origin myths are a story told about the founding and history of a particular group to reinforce that sense of common identity, to reinforce that ethnic or national identity that may be beneficial. So, ethnic identity is taught and reinforced in many ways, such as origin myths. So, in Korea, now talking about, when I say in Korea, I'm talking about Korea, both North and South, because for most of its long, long thousands of years of history, North and South Korea were one country. Well, sometimes they were multiple countries, but they were all one ethnic identity for sure. So the origin of Korea: a bear and a tiger pray to Hwang, the god king, to become human. Hwanung gave them 20 clovers of garlic and a bundle of mugwort, ordering them to eat only the sacred fruit and remain out of the sunlight for 100 days. The tiger gave up, but the bear persisted and was transformed into a human woman, marrying Hwanung and creating the Korean race. So you have a little video to watch. It is linked right below this video. I suggest you take a minute now, pause this video, and go watch the origin myth video from South Korea. And it's going to give you a little bit more detail on this fellow right here, who is the God King, and the tiger and the bear, which I've been talking about. So hopefully you went and watched that video, and now I want you to look at this upper image here. Does anybody know who this person is? He should be pretty familiar to many of us. That is Kim Jong-un. He is the current leader, I would say, of North Korea. And this is actually Mount Paektu, which is the same exact spot where the God King is sitting in this origin myth. So Mount Paektu is a very sacred mountain that exists in North Korea. It is just on the North Korean border. It is an inactive volcano, so even though it's very cold up there in the winter, there is this sort of lake that has formed. in the inactive part of the volcano, and it's very sacred to the Korean people. And North Korea actually uses it quite often as a bargaining chip when they want to get something from South Korea. They might need food or medical aid, something like that, and they will invite South Korean leaders, South Korean political or religious leaders or famous people to North Korea to visit Mount Baekdu, and they take pictures and images of it. So this is all still very, very important in North and South Korea, this origin myth, even though I don't think many people necessarily believe in it. They get certain lessons and they learn about what it means to be a Korean person from these myths. So you heard about in that video the lessons of being a Korean. You have to persist, you have to be diligent, you have to work hard. These are the values that supposedly make up the Korean people. So take a minute to think, what are some American origin myths? What are some American origin myths that teach us lessons about the values of America, American culture, and what it means to be an American and the kinds of traits we are supposed to have? What are some American origin myths? Well, I'm going to give you some examples. So, for example, the landing of the Mayflower, the very first Thanksgiving, the Boston Tea Party, the American Revolution, the Civil War, the settling of the West. Being from California, I'm very familiar with the Gold Rush, and not unlike the North Korea, South Korea, the Korean origin myths, our origin myths also tell us something about us and who we are supposed to be. Things that emphasize, these stories emphasize freedom, exploration, rugged individualism, and so on. And so I'd like you to watch this children's video that I used to use when I was an English teacher in South Korea. I would use these children videos to teach English lessons. It's very simple English sentences and kind of sort of a dumbed down American history for the kindergartners that were learning American English. But I'd like you to watch it anyway, even though it's meant for children, to see and to sort of remind you how you might have first learned about American origin myths and the sometimes very unproblematic way in which we represent the first interactions between the settlers, the colonial settlers from Europe, and the Native Americans, who were probably see this history in very, very different ways than are sort of visualized in this particular video. So take a second and watch that video, please. Now, the next video I'd like you to watch is talking about ethnic boundary markers. So ethnic boundary markers are another key important part, like origin myths, to national and ethnic identity, to seeing those really powerful ethnic identities and getting you to identify with them. So ethnic boundary markers are a practice or belief used to signify who is in a group and who is not in a group. But the problem is with ethnic boundary markers is that they change over time, and these boundary markers often change much faster than people move. So, for example, you've probably heard about China and what it is currently doing what we call ethnocide, that is trying to eradicate certain ethnic groups who are culturally not Han Chinese, but they're the Uyghurs, for example, who are Muslim and don't fit in well with the rest of China. Apparently, they are being forced to go to these sorts of camps where they have to learn about being Chinese, but they're really just concentration camps. And the problem has happened where China used to be a much smaller geographic, have much smaller ethnic boundary markers, used to be more limited to these areas in the east, but over the last 50, 80 years, it has expanded rapidly to areas of Tibet, Chinese-occupied eastern Turkmenistan, Inner Mongolia, Outer Mongolia. It has expanded, but those ethnic groups are still there. Now, that has happened, this isn't something that is unique to Chinese history. Same thing has also happened in the United States. If you we'll watch this video, it'll show you the sort of the history of our ethnic boundary markers and the way that our borders have also come to move very, very rapidly and overtake other ethnic groups that were living in these areas, such as Native Americans, such as Mexicans, and other parts of the United States. And it becomes problematic because it leads to other sorts of tragedies, such as genocide and ethnocide.